So we want to talk about the condo law.
Okay.
Yeah, the first question I just have is, at the last meeting, people were saying that since I own a condo, or part owner of a condo with my wife, that there's economic advantages if this law goes into effect, and I should recuse myself. And I just want to know if there's any truth that if the law is passed, that there would be financial impacts to existing condo owners.
Okay, we can start there. Thank you.
Bring your microphone.
Thank you for having me. I'll be as quick as I can. Excuse me. There's actually no guarantee what's going to happen to properties once this law is passed. I can tell you from the experience prior to today that in multiple jurisdictions, including ours, that I have not seen a difference in the sale prices of condominium units when they have gone from the restricted values for tax purposes to the market values for tax purposes.
All right, so
I can give you, yes ma'am, I can give you, I'm sorry.
The restricted values.
I'm gonna explain it.
Explain what a restricted value is.
So, before I get into specific examples, let me explain to the public, that there are two valuation methodologies. One is known as the for apartments, condos, and cooperatives. One is known as the restricted value, and that is using the income approach, which means in English that you are appraising the condominium complex as a whole and then taking that aggregate value and breaking it apart to the individual units. So that's the restricted value. Most condominium complexes units are owner occupied. So in order for me to value that as a whole, I have to go to the market and look at apartment complexes and see what they're renting for. 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom studios, that type of thing. I have to look into the market to find what the expenses are, how much it costs to operate that business. That's the restricted approach. It's the income approach. The market approach is if you have a condominium and it's worth $800,000, you pay taxes based on the $800,000. That's the market approach. That's what this law is talking about. The restricted value is what everybody here in the town is familiar with, that you'll hear people talking about condominiums and they're saying they're getting a 40% tax break. That's because of the restricted approach. That methodology has been in effect, I can't remember if it's 1974 or 1984, but it's been 40 or something years. So that was a law that was put on the books, and that's how it's been valued ever since.
A state law?
A state law, yes ma'am.
Two laws, in fact. The real property tax law and the tax law. But they say the same thing.
Yeah, I didn't want,
Yeah.
okay.
And is it accurate that New York State is now the only state that taxes condos in that restricted fashion?
In the country.
In the country?
So may I repeat that?
Yeah.
We are, in fact, New York State, in the entire United States, the only state that values properties, condominium complexes, units, based on that restricted value. The only one in the country.
Okay.
Okay? So to answer your question about your individual condo, I can't guarantee that it's not going to change that value because I don't have a crystal ball. However, looking at historic property sales, I will give you the perfect example, like you asked. It's the Landing in Dobbs Ferry. There's 103 units there, and they were valued as single-family homes. Their values were X, and their taxes were Y. That's the way it had been since the day they were built. They just recently converted to a condominium form of ownership, so their values, the entire complex, 103 units, was valued at $93 million. We had to drop that value down to $51 million. We lost $42 million off the taxable portion of the assessment roll because of the conversion. Having said that, since that time, there were 43 sales in that complex, 103 units. There were 43 sales, and there were 5 sales and resales. What I mean by the sales and resales is the sales occurred before the conversion, and then they converted, and then the sales occurred after the conversion. There was no difference. It was about, I'm sorry, factually, there was a 6% difference from the before and the after. And the real estate market in that particular area over the last couple years actually went up about 8%. So there's that little variable there. So I'm not seeing a change in the values from the prior to the after. In addition, we are the only state in the country that I know of that values properties, condominiums like this. In addition to that, this new law mandates us to, any shovel in the ground as of January 1, 2023, we value the condominium units as market value.
Okay,
We
I
are
have a
not-
question.
Okay, hold on one
Going
second.
back, but don't keep going because my question pertains.
Go ahead.
I mean, finish your sentence, but my question pertains to something you said
Okay.
before.
We are not the only municipality in the state of New York that values condominiums based on the market value, which is what this law is directing us to do. There are 4 municipalities right here in this area that are valuing condominiums based on market value because they have adopted the homestead exemption. Without getting into those details, the homestead mandates that municipality to value them based on market value. Town of Clarkstown in Rockland County, Sleepy Hollow, our next door neighbor to Tarrytown, the town of Rye, and the town of Pelham.
Okay, if I may.
Go ahead.
Going back to your example, the landing. That valuation happened during the pandemic, and real estate was going like hotcakes in this area, people moving up from the city. So I'd like another example at another time, if you may, because I think that was influenced by the fact that they sold, and they sold at the higher, at the similar price, was driven also by the increasing values of all homes because of the scarcity of them due to the sales during the pandemic.
That's actually, thank you, because that's actually the moral to my story, is that the market went up in that particular area about 6%. And I didn't see from the landing, from the sales and resales, I didn't see an appreciated value. I saw the 6%, like everybody else in the neighborhood got that 6% market. So what I would have expected to see, as everybody else expects to see, a huge increase in market values because of the reduction in the property taxes. It's not there. So I don't have another specific example of that scenario, but that is a huge telltale of exactly what we're talking about. Do you have questions, or you want me to go on?
No,
You want me to stop?
no, we have a long agenda.
I can stop anytime.
You have a motion, Paul?
Talk a little bit just about asking the state legislature to pass a law that would, enable us to have reduced, taxes for affordable, if in the future, if condos are sold at reduced, rates. So an example would be, let's say there's a condo that would sell for, people were saying, you know what, one of the goals of the town is to create, as Gina's committee has said, more affordable housing. So we don't want to adopt a law that would reduce our possibility of getting, more affordable housing. So if we would, let's say this legislation is passed, and then we ask the state to adopt another law that would say, that would authorize local governments to reduce the taxes if, say, condos in the future are sold at, say, under $400,000. Then we could basically be encouraging through tax incentives, more affordable condos, because as you said at the last, meeting, or when I spoke to you, you said, there's a lot of people are building condos that are going for $3 million or $2 million or $1 million.
And they don't care so much if they're
Right.
paying the
Right,
higher
so
taxes.
it's really, even to Elmwood, when they came in with the condos, they weren't talking about
They were $1 million.
affordable, they were talking about over $1 million.
Let's
Right,
clarify,
so-
not
so-
affordable,
so-
housing that is affordable, not affordable
Okay, so-
housing necessarily.
So I view that question being, can there be a carve-out in this legislation for actual affordable or low-income housing developments, or units that are built as affordable units in market rate housing developments because of the set-aside?
Okay, may I stop
Yeah,
you for
'cause
1
I
minute?
asked you
I
that
think you're
question
getting-
earlier.
I think you might be getting people confused. So I'm
And
going to
also
explain
talk
it.
about what's in the law regarding.
Yes, okay.
I'm going to explain it and
It's a carve-out.
put our real property, our condominiums, in 3 buckets. One, we have affordable housing. That's one bucket, and that's affordable. The next bucket is the middle income housing. The third bucket, the best way I can explain it, the third bucket is the high-end housing, okay? So the affordable component, which is what even the governor has said, don't agree with her terminology, but the affordable component in this law precludes me from valuing these in any fashion than the way it exists right now, which is the restricted value.
Truly affordable.
They're off the table.
Right.
Low income. Yeah.
They're assessed the way that they're assessed. Any new ones coming on will be assessed at that restricted value as well, the affordable housing.
Could I just make
Yeah,
that
please.
visual? So if the Housing Authority or Mark Soja, who builds, and currently they rent for low income, if they were to decide, you know what, we would like to have home ownership and do condos that are low income, they are not going to go to market rate. They are going to stay with the restricted value,
It
according to
depend-
the law. that we
According
have.
to the law, it depends on the financing, but you're correct. Yep.
there's
So
already
that's the
Yeah.
affordable
There's a
housing.
carve-out,
I
so
wanted
there's a
to
Carved
carve-out
out.
already.
I
Okay.
wanted to separate that.
Okay.
So next we have that middle income, and I think that that's what you're talking about. There's nothing in the law that precludes currently the valuation. So, but if you do have a condominium or even a single-family home that has those restricted market values, which we have several of them in town now, that they're restricted. They bought it for $200,000 and they're assessed at $200,000. And they pay taxes based on $200,000. They happen to be, that home happens to be in the $700,000 neighborhood, but it has a restricted value, restricted covenants, they're called, written in the deeds. That goes in perpetuity, which means forever. So their taxes are going to be restricted forever based on that market value. So,
So their taxes aren't going up?
well, they go up based on whatever the tax rate happens.
Okay.
But
They're
the
not going
value-
to go, they're not going to increase
Not gonna-
to the 100%.
To
Right,
the market.
that's
to the
what- that's what I
market.
meant.
Market
Because it's in a
value.
it's in a restricted covenant, right?
Because they're in a $600,000 or $700,000 neighborhood, but they're only valued at 200, because those are the restrictions, their valuation is 200. So,
Okay.
Okay.
And this does not apply to any existing condos. The 5,000 condo owners that are in the town of Greenburgh, this legislation has nothing to do with them.
I wish you could take your mask off and say that again, because that's huge capital letters, that this does not affect any existing.
Newly built.
Newly built,
Newly built, as of January 1, 2023.
2023. Yep.
And again, having this legislation with the other municipalities that currently have it, Clarkstown and Tannerai, Sleepy Hollow, they have condominium projects on the table.
But how much are those condominiums being sold for?
It depends on where they are. In Sleepy Hollow.
Well,
with-
Sleepy Hollow would be our market, so
Right,
let's
so-
just look at Sleepy Hollow.
Okay, so Sleepy Hollow, I think, don't quote me on this, but I think there's about 600 condos being built right now. They can't build them fast enough. In the offering plan, because they're condos, that was approved by the Attorney General, their average sale price is about 1.3 million. And with their change orders, which are equalizing to like $200,000, $300,000, or $400,000, they can't build them quick enough to sell them. So that's that market. Taxes are market taxes. You go across the river, which is in Clarkstown, keep messing that up. They're not as high end, so they might be $500,000 or $600,000 or $700,000, but that's high end for them. So there are multiple projects on the table right now in that jurisdiction. So same thing at the town of Rye. They haven't stopped building condos because of this valuation. So
At what kind of price point?
they're not as high as we are. They're less than $1 million.
In the town of Rye?
Yes, but the problem is most of the projects are in Portchester. So,
Oh,
because that's broken out, Portchester
okay.
and Rybrook. There are projects in Rybrook, but more in Portchester. I lost my train of thought. My point being is that the development has not stopped. So, do I think that there might be a little slowdown for a minute here for people to regroup? I do. Mostly because the developers would have to go back and recalibrate their financing. So I don't believe it's going to stop, but I think that that's what would put a pause on it for a minute.
Except Elmwood said that they would pay market rate, but then when we said, how can we hold you to that, we didn't have a way of doing it unless we passed this law.
Right.
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 Just to let you know that there has not been a condominium built in this town in over the last 10 or 15 years that has been less than $800,000-900,000, all the way up to a $3.3 million sale. The one that we did have that was the market, middle income, is the market rate housing. You weren't on the board back then either, but it was the water wheel. Remember that?
So that's a totally different project
Correct.
because the town owned the property.
Correct.
I worked on the contract on that thing. And Ardsley was under the federal mandate to put in,
To put affordable
to put in affordable housing. The town was not. And we also wanted to try and help out the volunteer firefighters in Ardsley. So they didn't have land costs because we basically, gave them the property.
And that was a huge advantage to the developer, which is why he was able to build the market rate housing. It's a problem.
But that's workforce housing.
Workforce.
Right? That's
Workforce
workforce housing, and
Yes.
that under the law that you just described, they're restricted, right?
Right.
And they're subject to a restrictive covenant, right? So their taxes would not go up based upon this law.
Well, they're existing.
They're existing.
Oh, they're existing anyway,
Yeah.
right? But if they were built today,
Right.
right, as
As
workforce
restricted.
housing,
Yeah.
restricted,
Restricted.
But they wanted to restrict.
then they wouldn't, then they wouldn't be subject to this new
If
law.
they had federal, state, or whatever the funding is.
Or local
If
agency
they
funding.
had restrictions in their deeds
Right.
to say that it has to stay as market rate housing, where that complex itself, it was just market, it would probably sell for $700,000 or $800,000. It doesn't.
Correct.
So what their values look like is what is called for in the restrictions
Right.
and what they can actually sell them for.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay, I'd like
You have a
to-
motion?
any-
Thank you, Edie.
And
Thank
that
you,
hear-
Edie.
and that hearing continues tomorrow night.
Yes.
At the town.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
Went down, thanks.
Thank you.
You want to make a motion, Paul, for the last time, maybe?
Executive session?